"Stop calling me your sweetheart," Martha Gable snapped. Ugh. The heavy wooden tray of cinnamon rolls hit the counter with a sound like a gavel. Every voice inside the Cheyenne bakery fell silent. Across from her stood Wyatt Vance. He was one of Wyoming's most powerful cattlemen. In one hand, he held a bouquet of autumn wildflowers, asters and goldenrod. With the other, he placed his father's gold watch on the counter between them. The swirling vines engraved in the gold caught the morning light. Martha expected an insult. What Wyatt said next offered Martha a marriage and a future for her little brother. It also gave her one dangerous chance to discover whether a lonely man's promise could become love. Only an hour earlier, Martha had believed it would be an ordinary autumn morning. But in Wyoming, nothing stays ordinary for long. The Wyoming wind did not merely blow. It screamed across a prairie that had already claimed too many lives. In the autumn of 1887, that wind carried the scent of iron. It carried the sharp, cold promise of a killing frost. The settler called this previous winter the Great Die-Up. It was a winter so brutal that entire herds perished where they stood. Fortunes disappeared beneath the drifting snow, across the plains. Snow and loss seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. By the spring thaw of 1887, many cattlemen had lost nearly everything they owned. The pride of many a cattle king lay buried in the mud. But inside the Golden Grain Bakery in Cheyenne, the world felt safe. The air was rich with the scent of rising dough. It smelled of wild honey. It smelled of the comforting warmth of brick ovens. Martha Gable stood behind the heavy oak counter. Her arms were often dusted in white flour like a ghost of the frontier. She was a woman, built like the mountains she lived under, broad-shouldered, strong-limbed, unshakable. In a town where fashionable women were praised for narrow waists and delicate manners, Martha stood apart. Their dresses and corsets had arrived from Chicago. Martha's strength had been shaped by work, responsibility, and survival. The socialites called her the Flower Mountain when they thought she was out of earshot. They whispered that her hands were too large for delicate lace. They said her spirit was too blunt for a proper parlor. But Martha Gable didn't have time for the fragile opinions of women in silk. She had a 10-year-old brother named Toby to feed. She had a promise to keep. 2 years earlier, a severe fever had swept through their cabin. It took her mother and her father in the same week. Never let him go hungry. Martha, her mother had whispered with her final, ragged breath, never let the cold world break his heart just because we aren't there to shield it. Martha lived by those words every single morning. She rose at 4 each morning while the moon was still high. She hauled heavy sacks of grain without a word of complaint. She kneaded dough until her muscles ached. Then came Wyatt Vance. He was the master of the Black Rose Ranch. His name carried the weight of 10,000 head of cattle and a ranch built over 2 generations. He was tall and weathered by the sun. He carried the quiet gravity of a man who had looked at ruin and refused to blink. For 3 Saturdays, he had walked into her shop. The bell above the door chimed like a warning every time he entered. Each time, he looked her directly in the eye. Most men in Cheyenne looked at the floor when they spoke to her. But Wyatt Vance met her eyes, and each time he called her sweetheart. To Martha, it felt like a barb. It felt like a mockery of her size and her station. On this particular Saturday, the tension finally snapped. Martha had just removed her flour-covered apron and hung it beside the oven. Beneath it, she wore a plain navy dress. It was the dress she used whenever she served customers. She stood tall, her chest heaving with indignation. The chatter in the bakery died instantly as she shouted. A group of ladies in the corner froze. Their tea remained suspended midway to their lips. Toby was sitting by the stove. He was carving a small horse out of cedar wood. He looked up with wide, frightened eyes. Wyatt Vance did not flinch. He stood several feet from the counter. His 2 ranch hands remained near the back wall. They were silent and visibly uncomfortable beneath the stares of the other customers. "I own this bakery. Mr. Vance," she said. Her voice was low and steady. "I am not a girl to be teased, and I am certainly not your sweetheart. If you came here to make me a laughingstock for your men, take your flowers and your watch and leave." Wyatt slowly removed his hat. His dark hair was silvered at the temples by the stress of the territory. "I know exactly who you are. Martha Gable," he said. His voice was surprisingly soft. "I didn't come here to mock you. I came because the Black Rose is dying, and I am the only one left to save it." Martha frowned. Her anger shifted into a wary, protective confusion. The banks were closing in on the cattlemen after the great die-up. The land was unforgiving. "The Eastern bankers do not care how much sweat we have put into this land," Wyatt continued. "After last winter, they no longer trust cattle alone as security. They want organized household accounts. They want controlled expenses and winter provisions. They want proof that the Black Rose can survive another bad season. I can manage cattle, Martha. I have failed at nearly everything that turns a ranch into a lasting home." Martha let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "So you want a puppet?" she asked. "You want someone delicate to pour tea while you beg for loans? Look at me, Wyatt. I have flour in my pores and calluses on my palms. I am not a socialite." Wyatt stepped closer. The scent of pine and leather moved with him. "I've seen the socialites," he said. "I've seen them wilt the moment the pump freezes. I don't need a doll. Martha, I need a partner. I need someone who knows how to survive a Wyoming winter without folding. I've watched you for months. I saw you haul those sacks when the delivery man's wagon broke. I saw you give the last loaf of bread to the widow Higgins, and I saw the way you look at that boy." He gestured toward Toby. Martha felt a strange heat in her cheeks. "I am offering you a business arrangement, Martha," Wyatt said. "Marry me, and your bakery debt will become part of our written household agreement. The Black Rose will pay it in installments from the ranch income. Toby will have a room, proper lessons, and every book we can honestly afford. You will remain the legal owner of this shop. Every term will be witnessed before we say a vow." Martha gripped the edge of the counter. Her knuckles turned white. "You're asking me to marry you because I'm strong," she whispered. "I'm asking because you're the only person in this town who isn't afraid of the truth," Wyatt replied. He pushed the gold watch toward her. "Keep this as a down payment on my word. If I ever fail you, sell it. Use the money to take Toby and go wherever you want." Martha looked at the watch. Then she looked at Toby. His boots were worn through at the toes. Poor harvests and rising freight costs had pushed the price of flour beyond what many families could afford. As the creator of this story, Martha's worry feels surprisingly familiar to me. In July 2026, grocery prices in the United States were still 2.7% higher than a year earlier, with cereals and bakery products rising by the same amount. A reminder that the cost of feeding a family still shapes difficult choices. For Martha, that pressure was not written on a government chart. It was visible in Toby's worn boots and the flour left in her bins. She thought of her mother's dying promise, never let him go hungry. She thought of the dignity in building a home someone would fight to keep. "1 year," Martha said. Her voice shook slightly. "If we cannot make a life together in 1 year, I return to my bakery. And the payments continue until the bakery debt is cleared." Wyatt nodded once. "1 year," he agreed. "And if you choose to leave when that year ends, the bakery will still be yours. I will not stand in your way." Martha did not answer immediately. She lifted the watch and felt its weight settle into her palm. "You will not decide everything simply because you own more land than I do," she said. Wyatt met her eyes. "I would expect nothing less." Before sunset, they sat with Reverend Hale and a lawyer in the small office behind the church. Martha read every line of the agreement twice. The bakery would remain hers. Its debt would be paid from an agreed portion of ranch income, never from the sale of her property. Toby would live with them and receive lessons while remaining under Martha's guardianship. If the marriage ended after 1 year, Wyatt would provide a wagon and safe passage back to Cheyenne. When the lawyer offered Martha the pen, Wyatt did not hurry her. He simply waited. Martha signed her name in a steady hand. Toby watched from the chair beside her. "Does this mean Mr. Vance is going to be my brother?" he asked. Martha nearly smiled. "No," she said. "It means we are going to learn whether 3 strangers can become a family." Wyatt glanced at the boy. "That sounds like harder work than cattle." "It probably is," Toby replied. For the first time that day, Wyatt laughed. The news hit Cheyenne like a prairie fire. The Cattle King was marrying the Flower Mountain. The whispers in the streets grew louder, but Martha held her head high. On the day of the wedding, she wore a simple navy wool dress. It was the color of a deep mountain lake before a storm. The ceremony was brief, held in the small church while the wind rattled the glass. When Wyatt placed the ring on her finger, his hand was steady. It was a band of raw Wyoming gold. He looked at her with a profound, quiet recognition. They left for the Black Rose that evening. The ranch was a massive structure of stone and timber. It stood defiant against the rolling, golden hills. It was merely a collection of silent rooms and dusty furniture. Martha didn't wait for an invitation to change that. On her first morning, she was in the kitchen before the sun rose. The smell of wood smoke filled the cold halls. She began to bake. When the ranch hands came in for breakfast, they were hesitant. A dozen rough ranch hands hovered by the door. They were uncertain whether they had been invited to sit. "Sit down," Martha commanded, "and wash your hands at the basin first. I don't serve food to men who expect the barn brought to their table." The men scrambled to obey. Wyatt sat at the head of the table. He watched her move with confidence. He ate every scrap of the sourdough bread she had prepared. Breakfast changed more than the men's opinion of Martha's cooking. Before leaving the table, she asked the foreman how much flour, salt, and dried fruit remained in storage. The man stared at her as though she had asked him to recite poetry. "No one has counted since before the blizzard, ma'am." "Then we begin today?" Martha spent the morning opening barrels, weighing sacks, and marking every quantity in a ledger. She discovered spoiled beans beneath a leaking roof and 3 crates of apples that would be useless within a week. Instead of throwing them away, she cut away the bruised portions and turned the good fruit into preserves. She dried the peels near the stove to flavor winter tea. By evening, the kitchen shelves held labeled jars. The ranch hands understood that Martha's thrift was as valuable as her bread. Wyatt found her standing on a stool, reaching for the highest shelf. Without speaking, he steadied the stool with one hand. "I could have managed," she said. "I know. Then why are you holding it?" "Because knowing you can stand alone does not mean I should let you fall." Martha looked down at him. His expression held no mockery and no pity. For one unsettling moment, she forgot about their agreement, the bankers and the year waiting between them. Then she placed the final jar on the shelf. "You may let go now, Mr. Vance." But her voice had lost some of its sharpness. As the weeks passed, the Black Rose began to transform. Martha did more than bake. She brought order to everything she touched. She found waste in the ledgers. The numbers told a story no one at the Black Rose had wanted to read. Feed had been purchased twice from 2 different suppliers. A rail agent in Cheyenne had charged Wyatt for cattle cars that never arrived. Several ranch hands were still listed for wages even though they had left after the great die-up. Martha carried the ledgers into Wyatt's study and spread them across his desk. "You are losing money before a single steer reaches market." Wyatt studied the pages. His jaw tightened as she showed him each error. "I should have seen this. You are trying to keep thousands of cattle alive. That is not an excuse." "No," Martha said. "It is an explanation. There is a difference." They worked together until the lamps burned low. Wyatt knew the land, the cattle, and every mile of fence. Martha understood quantities, debts, and how small waste became ruin when repeated every week. By midnight, they had canceled one dishonest freight contract and prepared letters disputing the false charges. Wyatt leaned back in his chair. "The bank sent 3 men to examine these accounts. None of them found what you found in one evening." "They were looking for reasons to own your ranch," Martha replied. "I was looking for ways to save our home." The word escaped before she could stop it. Wyatt heard it. He did not tease her or draw attention to it. He simply passed her another page and moved his chair closer so they could share the light. Their shoulders did not touch. Still, Martha remained aware of the narrow space between them for the rest of the night. She mended the linens. She stocked the root cellar with enough preserves to carry the household through winter. She turned the cold stone house into a fortress of warmth. Toby thrived in the thin mountain air. Hein learned the language of horses and the rhythm of the land. One evening, Toby walked up to Wyatt by the fire. He held out the cedar horse he had been carving. It's for you, sir, Toby said. Wyatt took the little wooden horse in his scarred fingers. Why me? Son, because Martha says every hard-working man ought to have something waiting for him when he comes home. Toby replied. Wyatt looked across the room at Martha. She was busy mending a heavy winter coat. She didn't look up, but her hands trembled slightly. Wyatt tucked the cedar horse into his vest pocket. He placed it right next to his heart. I'll keep it with me always, he promised. Later that night, after Toby had fallen asleep, Martha found Wyatt alone on the porch. The wind carried the first scattered flakes of snow across the yard. He was holding the cedar horse beneath the lantern light. You made him happy, Martha said. He gave me far more than a gift, Wyatt replied. I gave it because you have never treated him as a burden. Wyatt placed the carving carefully inside his vest. My father believed boys became men by being left alone with hardship. And did it work? It taught me how to endure, Wyatt said. It did not teach me how to belong anywhere. Martha stood beside him, leaving a respectful distance between them. For several moments, they watched the snow gather along the fence rails. Why the wildflowers? She asked. Wyatt looked toward her. The flowers you brought to the bakery. Asters and goldenrod survive poor soil, hard wind, and early frost, he said. They seem more honest than roses. Martha understood what he had not been brave enough to say. He had not chosen the flowers because they were delicate. He had chosen them because they reminded him of her. You should have explained that before calling me sweetheart. I had planned to. What stopped you? You did? A laugh slipped out before she could stop it. Wyatt smiled, and the hard lines around his eyes softened. He offered her his arm when they returned inside. Martha hesitated only a moment before taking it. The peace was shattered in November. The Chicago banker, Mr. Sterling, arrived without warning. He came in a black carriage pulled by 4 matched horses. He was wrapped in furs that cost more than a ranch hand could earn in a year. During the midday meal, Sterling sat at the table like a king. He looked at Martha with a sneer. Tell me, Vance, Sterling said, I heard you married for utility, but I expected someone with greater refinement. Judging by the grocery bill, your wife appears to have brought a considerable appetite to the Black Rose. The room went silent. Martha felt that old, familiar shame rising like a dark tide. She wanted to shrink into the floor. She waited, hoping Wyatt would stay quiet and keep the banker's favor. But Wyatt Vance pushed his chair back with a screech. He stood up. When he stood, the room tightened around him. Mr. Sterling, Wyatt said. His voice ground between his teeth. You are a guest in this house, but you are also a fool. My wife is the heart of this ranch. Martha's fingers tightened around the napkin in her lap. All her life, people had spoken of the space she occupied as an offense. No one had ever called her the heart of anything. She has done more to secure the future of this ranch in 3 months than you have done for your bank in 30 years, Wyatt continued. She is the bravest woman I have ever known. If you ever speak of her with anything but respect, you will leave. Sterling turned pale. I was only making a jest, Vance. A jest at the expense of a lady is the mark of a coward, Wyatt said. Apologize to my wife. Now. Sterling looked at the cold fury in Wyatt's eyes. My apologies, Mrs. Vance, he stammered. I meant no offense. The meal is over, Wyatt said. You will leave this house and take the rest of your business to our attorney. After the banker left, the house felt strangely quiet. Martha stood by the sink, her hands shaking. Wyatt walked into the kitchen. You shouldn't have done that, Martha whispered. He'll call the loan, and we'll lose everything. A loan purchased with your humiliation would cost me more than this ranch is worth, he said. I will not let a man insult you. Martha, look at me. She turned, her eyes bright with tears. I married you because I saw how you cared for Toby, he said. I saw how you fed people who could not pay. I saw how you stood before me without pretending to be afraid. I love you. Martha, not for what you can do for this ranch, but for the woman you are when no one is watching. He drew a careful breath. You are beautiful, and you are powerful. And if you will still have me, I want this marriage to last far longer than a year. Martha let out a sob of relief. She took his face in her large, flour-dusted hands. I've spent my whole life trying to be smaller, she whispered. You're the first person who ever told me I was enough." Wyatt lowered his forehead to hers. Martha did not turn away. When he kissed her, it was gentle and certain. It was free of every bargain that had brought them together. In that moment, Martha understood that the flower mountain had never defined her. The cruel name only revealed the smallness of those who had used it. She was Martha, and she was loved. But the frontier rarely allowed peace to last. On January 12th, 1888, a warm morning gave way to a violent Arctic front. The storm would be remembered as the schoolchildren's blizzard. Within hours, the temperature fell sharply. The open country disappeared behind driven snow. Wyatt and several ranch hands were out checking the winter herd. Toby was at the schoolhouse 3 miles from the ranch. Martha waited until the first flake struck the windows sideways. She did not hesitate. Martha hitched the strongest draft horse to the low supply sled. She packed blankets, heated stones, and a covered lantern. A fence line followed most of the road toward the schoolhouse. Martha kept one gloved hand against the wire whenever the snow erased the trail. Halfway there she heard a child crying beyond the wind. The teacher and 5 pupils had taken shelter in a shallow cut in the land. They were lost in the whiteout. Martha brought them to the sled one at a time. She wrapped them in blankets and placed the warm stones near their feet. She looped a rope around the sled so no child could wander off. Toby clung to her coat. "I knew you would come," he whispered. Martha climbed onto the front of the sled. She turned the horse toward home. The animal followed the fence line while Martha shielded the lantern beneath her coat. By the time they reached the black rose, ice covered her hair. Her hands had gone numb, but every child returned alive. The ranch house became an emergency shelter. Martha gave each child warm broth in small spoonfuls and changed their wet stockings before allowing them near the hottest part of the fire. She remembered her mother doing the same for Toby during his fever. The memory steadied her hands. The teacher sat wrapped in a quilt, her face pale with guilt. "I should never have taken them outside. You made the best choice you could when the storm blinded you," Martha said. "Save your strength. They need you calm now." Toby refused to release Martha's sleeve. His lips had regained their color, but fear remained in his eyes. "Were you frightened?" he asked. "Very, but you came anyway." Martha pulled him against her. "Courage does not mean the fear disappears. It means someone you love matters more than the fear." The front door opened sometime after dark. Wyatt stumbled inside with two ranch hands supporting him. Ice clung to his coat and beard. His first glance went to Toby, then to the other children beside the fire. Finally, he looked at Martha. "You brought them home," he said. "We brought one another home." Wyatt reached into his vest and drew out the cedar horse. A thin glaze of ice flecked one side, but the little carving stayed whole. Toby closed his fingers around it. "You brought it home," he whispered. "I promised I always would," Wyatt replied. Then he pulled Toby against one side of him and Martha against the other. For the first time, none of them seemed uncertain about what they had become. They were no longer 3 people fulfilling an agreement. They were a family that had survived the storm. 3 days after the storm, a telegram arrived from Chicago. Sterling called in the old loan, just as Martha had feared, but they did not break. Wyatt sold a distant parcel of grazing land. Martha used the ranch ledgers to prove their stability. After weeks of negotiation, a Denver lender agreed to refinance the balance. The terms were difficult but manageable. On their first anniversary, Wyatt took Martha to the ridge. The grass had turned amber, and the ridge was dotted with late-blooming asters and goldenrod. The air was crisp and clean. He pulled out a silver locket and handed it to her. Inside was a photograph of the 3 of them, Wyatt, Martha, and Toby, standing in front of the home they had built together. "You are the most beautiful woman in Wyoming," he whispered. Martha looked at the vast, wild land beyond the distant Laramie Range. She realized that true beauty wasn't found in a silk ribbon. It was found in the courage to love when the world was cold. It was found in the dignity of a woman who knew she was the heart of the home. As the sun set, Martha leaned her head on Wyatt's shoulder. She was Martha Vance, and she had finally come home. The wind still screamed across the Wyoming plains, but it no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like a song of survival. If Martha and Wyatt's journey touched you, tell us in the comments what dignity looks like to you. Please like this story and subscribe for more tales of courage, family, and love from the American frontier. Until next time, keep your fire burning and your heart open. May God bless you and your family. This fictional Western romance draws on the hardships and resilience of 19th century frontier life. Its characters and events have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. AI tools may have assisted with parts of the production. The final story and presentation were reviewed and directed by the channel creator,